Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Excellent. We do record these sessions so that anyone who wants to review it or didn't get to join the event can watch the session. So welcome to our free seminar here at School16, where we're going to do a live Q&A with Tolu Lawal, who is an instructor here at School16, but also a tech professional working in customer success in Google, and formerly has led more product operations oriented roles, which Tolu will ask you to introduce yourself in a second. But we're going to talk today specifically about how to prepare for interview for customer facing roles, and we're going to learn that through Tolu's story. And so Vadim and I have a number of questions here set up for Tolu. But also, please do type into the chat. We have some folks here typing in the chat where they're from, which is great. We'd love to hear where you're from so other people can see as well. But also, if there's a particular thing that you want to learn from Tolu, we will have an opportunity for folks to ask questions directly toward the end, last 10, 15 minutes or so. But I encourage you to type in questions in the meantime. Here's our agenda for today. Doing a quick introduction right now. It's going to take just another 2 more minutes. Then we'll hear an intro from Tolu. And then we're going to talk about that discussion that I just mentioned, which is questions around non-coding customer-facing roles in technology. Real quick introduction from School16. If you're new to School16, I know we have some probably some alumni or current students, and also students that are just enrolling into our program that's starting in March here on the Zoom. So welcome. Really exciting to see you. And if you are new to School16, we started our organization after working for years in tech and actually teaching at universities like NYU, because we think the traditional education model does not really prepare people for roles in tech. And we also know from our own personal experience, from Tolu's experience, that you do not need to be technical to be successful in landing roles in tech and developing a lucrative and fulfilling career in technology roles. And so that's why we exist. That's why we do seminars like this on a regular basis that you're welcome to join. But if you're somebody who is really committed and ready to take the next step to get into a career in tech, or wants to level up your career in a technology company, we encourage you to consider applying for our program. So it's very hands-on. So it's not like one of those passive certificate programs where you just watch some videos and get a certificate in the end. No, it's actually live classes. The next session that's starting at March 27th is taught by Tolu, who you're going to hear from today. And we had an early deadline this week, but next week is going to be the last opportunity to enroll in the March cohort for the class that Tolu is going to teach. It's a 4-month part-time program that we are interviewing people for actively. So I do encourage you to apply. The link is right here, school16.co/apply. And if you just want to apply to explore what School16 is like and talk to one of us to get advice on your career, that's cool too, right? There's no obligation at all to apply, but really it's just for us to get to know you, to see if we can possibly help you. And the program starts on March 27th. There's different areas you can concentrate on in School16 if you end up joining, not just customer success, although that is the role that we really focus on here at School16. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here so we can get right into our conversation here with Tolu. As a quick question, initial question, Tolu, would love for you to introduce yourself. And in that introduction, would love to hear why you decided to get into tech and customer success in particular. What got you interested in these customer-facing roles in tech, and how did you get it?
Certainly. Well, appreciate the introduction, Sergey. Can everyone hear me okay? Is my audio just fine? Okay, great. Well, a little bit about me. I'm originally from Nigeria. I was born in Nigeria, and my family soon immigrated when I was about 10 years old to New York. Been in New York pretty much ever since, other than for college, in which I went to Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. I wasn't exposed, quite honestly, to a lot of different career options when I was younger. Came from a low-income, first-generation college background. I was the first generation of my family to attend college. So I wasn't too aware of the different job opportunities out there. Decided to kind of do what everyone else was doing that I saw in college, and end up applying to a bunch of different consulting companies. Landed a job at one of them and had a decent experience. That took me down a path of working at 3 different consulting companies, where I learned a bit, but didn't feel like it was perfect for me. Didn't feel like it was a great fit. I was looking at other opportunities, and quite honestly, at that point, I still wasn't clear on what different roles was. I didn't know what customer success individuals do, but I had a friend who was working a customer success role who seemed to be having a good experience. I chatted with him kind of briefly about it. He said he would recommend it. He enjoys the work. So I ended up applying for a role at a few different companies. Was fortunate to get the opportunity to work at Uber. And from there, I've had the opportunity to work at a few other companies. So I worked in a program manager role at Google, product operation at Stripe, and now in customer success at Google. So I've had a few different opportunities to work at a few companies. But what brought me to customer success? A bit of it was just hearing someone saying that it was a good career opportunity for them. Another part of it, as I went through the process of applying and actually going through the interview process, was realizing that it was similar to what I had come across in consulting. So it was very much being able to build relationship with customers, being able to solve problems as they come up, being able to learn and adapt to what's happening in your business and what's happening for your customers, and ultimately being able to serve your business and your customers' business. So I thought I had a pretty good skill set for it. I'm still learning, still have a long way to go. And I think it's a field where you're always learning. Actually, today and yesterday, I was in a festival specifically for customer success, so I can continue learning. Some people who have decades of experience, be able to learn from them. So that's also one thing I love about the field is that it's ever evolving, and there's always opportunity to grow and learn and connect with other individuals who've been in the field a longer time than myself.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Tolu. It definitely sounds like your consulting experience was super relevant. What would you say is different between the work that you do in consulting and the reality of a customer success role?
In consulting, I was working specifically at other customer sites. So I'd actually go there and physically be present. And I would do whatever I can to essentially move forward whatever my company had agreed to with the client or the customers. It is primarily you trying to deliver on a scope of work that's pretty set out. And it may change slightly, but generally from the very beginning of the engagement, particularly called consulting engagements, you know what you're trying to accomplish. You have a preset time frame, you have a start date and end date. There may be some minor adjustments, but you have clarity as to what exactly it is you're trying to do for the company. With customer success, I find it's almost the exact opposite. You generally will have a book of business, so a set of customers or accounts that you're responsible for, but there isn't a set time or time frame in which you're working with the customers. Things will probably change. Your product, your services, how the company is using it, what goals or metrics you're trying to hit with the company are constantly changing. And so you're trying to learn to keep up with both your own product and just being able to make sure your customer success is successful with whatever they're buying from your company. So I'd say that the main delta is one, more ambiguity. So lack of certainty around what you're doing with the customer. Two, just the evolution in your goals with the customer. And three, I'd say you also have a lot more ownership. Within consulting, you generally have a structure where you have a consulting team that's responsible for delivering this big project. They can be small teams, they can be big teams. Within customer success, sometimes you will have a team. You work with a salesperson, maybe an account manager or a field sales representative or a customer engineer, and you'll be working together to achieve the goals that you set with the customer. But a lot of time you are, you can say, the quarterback. You're the person orchestrating everything, more accountable and responsible for the success of the customer. And then you're bringing other people in to help with specific portions of making sure the customer is successful. So within consulting, it's a little bit more of divided. You attack the portion of the work that's allocated to you. Within customer success, you are orchestrating. You're the project manager, you're the quarterback, to use a sports analogy, and you then leverage other individuals to make sure that what you're doing with the customer is successful.
Jump in here, Tolu. Thanks for that. I think a lot of people that are here are going to be wondering, especially if they're interested in a customer success role, what is sort of the minimum background that you need to start being considered for these types of opportunities? Now, I know part of your background was doing sales related work, right? I believe it was at Uber. Do you feel like that is the number one piece of experience that hiring managers are going to look for? Like, do you have experience in sales or other functions and backgrounds that look attractive to hiring managers specifically for customer success roles?
Certainly. And to give some context as to, for people who may not know, we kind of jumped into customer success and we're getting into it. But in terms of, if you never heard the term before, maybe there's a first time you're seeing it or not familiar with what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. Essentially, as a customer success person, you are allocated some level of business that you are trying to grow, drive, retain. So make that very concrete. Let's say you're a customer success for a company like Slack. That would mean that you are responsible for ensuring that a certain number of companies that use Slack are successful with how they're using Slack. So you may be responsible for how Google, how Facebook, how Amazon is using Slack. So you are the Slack point of contact for these different companies that you are in charge of. That's what we call your book of business. Now, what your day-to-day looks like and what you're responsible for as a customer success person can differ from company to company. At certain companies, it's more so just making sure that the companies you support understand the product and their users are able to use it successfully. At other companies, you'll be responsible for things that we call upsell, cross-sell, meaning that your accounts or the customers you're supporting bought or committed to a certain amount of money with your company. And over time, you're responsible for making sure that they're spending more money, they're buying more of your products or more of your services. So a few different flavors of what you can see as a customer success manager. I give that context to say what hiring managers look for will differ slightly from company to company and product or service to product and service. So companies where the product or service you're working with is a lot more technical, then they may be looking for someone that has a bit more of a technical background. If it's a company where it's more of a very strong sales environment, maybe they'll look at someone with a bit more of a sales background. That said, I'd say if you're looking across the board, generally what I see hiring managers looking for are a few things. One, how quickly are you able to learn? As I mentioned earlier, chances are, even if you're coming into your role with some knowledge, maybe you've used Slack yourself before, now you're becoming a Slack customer success manager, you may have some context, but Slack is not what it was a year ago, 2 years ago. So you're constantly learning, what does your tool, your service, your product do today that didn't do yesterday? How can your customers leverage it today that they couldn't yesterday? What new use cases or what other ways can your customer use this tool or service? So you constantly need to update your knowledge to be able to make those assessments. So being able to show in some way that you're someone that can learn, as the eagerness, the willingness to learn, I think is, for me, paramount. Two is, how well are you able to interact with people? So end of the day, customer success roles are very much a people-oriented role. You're interfacing, you're meeting with customers, you're trying to set expectation with them, you're trying to make sure they take certain actions. So being able to relate to people, formally, informally, is a huge factor. Actually, in today's session, I had a senior director of customer success talk about a situation in which they were willing to hire somebody. The interview went well, everything looked great, but then they did a quick Google search and found that, oh, based on what I'm seeing on Google search from this person, I'm not sure I'm confident if I actually put them in front of customers that they would be able to interact with people well. So I think that's also a huge factor. So I'd say being able to learn and learn quickly, being able to interact with customers, and ultimately being able to balance different things at the same time. So as customer success, one of the big things you balance is, how do I make sure I'm doing what's in the best interest of my company and what's in the best interest of my customers? So sometimes it won't be clear that you can do one thing and it'll benefit both. But as a customer success manager, you're both trying to make sure your company is successful and that your customer is successful. So you constantly need to be aware of whatever you're doing. Am I balancing the needs of my company, the goals my company has? Am I also ensuring that my customers are successful and they're achieving whatever results or whatever they're looking to achieve with my products or services? So I'd say across those three, which is not, I mean, it's anything someone can have, and it can look different in how you show it. You may be able to talk about, for example, the first, your ability to learn. You can say that, oh, I read this many books, or actually I learned HTML over a few months. Or for example, for me, I ended up learning SQL for over a few months because I needed to for a role that I was in. So there are different ways you can demonstrate these things, but I would say those three, if you have them, you would definitely be a strong candidate. And being able to speak to how your experience indicates you have them will give you a leg up as compared to other people applying for the same role.
Thanks for that answer, Tolu. I think all those sound so important, and in particular communication. You mentioned, right, that hiring manager going and getting a sense of that person's communication style by researching them and losing that confidence. And I think people, discount that fact, like what you put on LinkedIn, what you post, how you write, what you might post on Instagram and your public profiles is a reflection of how you might act in a professional setting. And I'm curious, given that, I wonder if there's a time where you saw someone convincingly communicate that, like convince you that they would have the ability to work with a customer effectively, even if, let's say, they didn't necessarily have that direct experience in a previous customer success role, but something else that's tangential. Have you come across that, whether perhaps with students that you've taught at School16 or people that you may have interviewed for different roles or referred to different roles, of how they successfully communicated their experience in a way that made someone convinced that they would be able to effectively deal with customers?
100%. So I've helped out, and I've been one of many individuals in some recruiting processes. So I guess give a more formal answer, maybe one that's more informal. And I've seen people talk about experiences that may not be traditionally, this is me doing customer success, but be able to present in a manner that's clear. They understand what customer success is, and they know how it applies to their own experience. So give an example of someone working in retail and talking about helping people choose the right outfits when they come into a store. So physically saying, hey, this is something you may like, making sure that the person is able to buy something that they will be happy with, but also making sure that as they're making recommendations, they're conscious of what the retail store is trying to sell the customers. So it's a balance between, hey, I want the person to like my recommendation, be clear that, hey, they want to buy this thing. I'm telling them this is a good fit. It looks good on them. They feel good about it. But also there are items at the store that are more high margin or low margin, meaning that the company may make more or less money depending on what the shopper buys. So being able to balance the two was an example that I thought was not maybe very obvious in customer success, but showed clearly that the person understood that balancing act of doing what's right by your customer and also doing what's right by your company.
I think that's a great example. And, in particular, retail is a really hard job. For anybody that's done it knows it's an incredibly difficult job. But it's also really hard to communicate to someone in a tech role why it's relevant. And most people don't have that practice of doing that. And I think it's so important. I'm curious, in your experience, how important is it to, let's say you are interviewing for a technology company, right? You've worked at Uber, Stripe, Google, all technology companies, all products that most of us use every day. So we probably understand how the products work. But how important is it to have a certain level of technical aptitude, or how technical do you have to be in terms of your language and what you say for someone to take you seriously?
Yeah, so it really depends on the company, the role, and the seniority in which you're entering the role. So at Uber, let's say that, for example, going into that interview, I quite honestly knew what Uber is, and I was specifically interviewing with Uber Eats, which honestly at that point I had never even used Uber Eats myself. I prefer to cook. I like cooking, so I wasn't one who was using the Uber Eats app, so I couldn't even speak to it from a first, like, I've used it, so this is what I understood. And when I went through the interview process, there wasn't a single question about Uber Eats. It wasn't like, oh, what would you change about the Uber Eats app, or what's your advice on our strategy? Because quite honestly, maybe I would have gone poorly. But there were more questions that were general to, how would you think about a situation like this? If you were faced with this, what do you think is the next best action? If a customer says this to you, how would you think about responding? So a lot of it was abstracted away. It wasn't that I had to be very, very knowledgeable in Uber Eats and this is how menus are built and this is what's happening in the restaurant industry. And I would say a component of that is I was coming at an entry-level role. So there was an expectation that I was, coming in with deep industry knowledge or deep knowledge of the role. So I would say if you're pivoting into tech or you're just about to enter your first role, your first professional job, then whoever is interviewing, the hiring manager, has the understanding that you may not have the technical language. You may not know that this is exactly what objection handling is, or this is what it means to do an upsell, cross sell, or terms that over time you will pick up. But as long as you can communicate examples and your understanding and your general approach to things, then you're in a better situation. Now, as you get more and more senior and you apply for roles that are higher, then there's an expectation that you can say, okay, this is a situation in which I did some objection handling, and this is what it means to do a POC or a proof of concept. So I'd say if you're going for entry level role, I wouldn't overthink being too technical, but I will put this asterisk. If you are trying to be very competitive and the nature of the product or service that you'll be supporting is more technical, then I would encourage you to do what you can to get some of that technical knowledge. So for example, if you want to be a customer success manager supporting something like Salesforce or Pegasystems, there are some free certifications and there are some free programs you can enroll in to get yourself more technically knowledgeable, specifically in Salesforce or specifically in Pegasystems or specifically in that tool. I believe that you don't necessarily need it, but having that is going to show two things. One, you have some technical understanding already. So whatever the gap is, it's going to be smaller than someone who doesn't. And two, also shows that you're someone willing to take initiative. If you're not in the role and you're already doing a bit of research, looking to get some knowledge, then you're going to stand out compared to someone who hasn't. So I'd say, to recap, you don't, especially if you're in an entry level role, you don't need to know all the technical terms. You don't need to come up as a very technical candidate. If you're going into more advanced role, yes, I'd advise you to kind of brush up, but naturally with the experience you may have, or if you're coming in with industry knowledge, you'll probably have some of that terminology already. But that said, if you do have the opportunity and you're going for a more specific role, or you're interested in a very specific company or specific product or service, then it's worth investing some time into increasing your knowledge so that you stand out in the recruitment process.
Thanks for that, Tolu. Just folks, one of the things I kind of want to highlight here, if you're feeling maybe even a little bit overwhelmed, thinking, well, how am I going to get this entry level opportunity in the first place? Or what do I do if I get that first round interview? Remember, you're not alone, right? I mean, obviously you're part of this community at School16. We have a lot of mentors that you can reach out to, but really reaching out to anybody that you can find through your connections or even cold on LinkedIn to talk to them, to get a sense of them, what their customer success roles are like, right? So let's say you're right out of college, or maybe you're changing careers. Find someone that's around your age, that's been in a customer success role for a couple of years, reach out to them and ask for advice. And on that call, ask them questions like we're asking Tolu. What can I expect in that first round interview? We're giving you a lot of insight here. You might get some slightly different answers. And then if you build a relationship with that person in a couple of weeks, you can even ask them to jump on a call and practice those interview questions, those behavioral questions that Tolu was talking about, right? How did you behave in this type of environment with a customer? The best interviewers, people that end up landing roles at either startups or big tech companies, they oftentimes bomb their first couple of interviews, right? No one's born great at interviewing, but what they're really good at is following through and finding someone to practice with to make sure that they're not going to bomb the next one. So remember, it might not be easy in the beginning, but through practice, you'll get better and better at knowing how to answer these types of specific questions that for a customer-facing role are really important. Tolu mentioned objection handling. That's really common in sales, right? You get an objection from a customer that says, hey, you're trying to upsell them, for example, and they tell you, no, you know what? I don't want to spend more money on your product because of X, Y, Z. Well, you need to practice ahead of time to know how you're going to handle that exact situation, or maybe what you're going to ask them next to try to get out of that objection or get ahead of that objection. So remember, that's definitely a resource that you have at your disposal. Tolu, I want to focus on maybe kind of like the first part of the interview, and you already started touching on this, but the very first conversation that people are going to have are probably not even going to be with a hiring manager. It's going to be with a recruiter at the company, and that recruiter's job is to disqualify you, right? To make sure they don't waste time of the hiring manager if you're not going to be a fit. What are some of those initial questions do you think that you might get if you're just talking to a hiring manager where they might want to disqualify you? Are they more based on your experience? Do they already go in and start asking you these behavioral questions, or is that later on?
Yeah, so first I want to add to what you just said, and it will link right into the question you asked now. Can't emphasize enough how valuable I think it is to be able to grow and leverage your network. As an example, my first role in tech at Uber was me reaching out to someone who I never met, didn't know who they were, but they were a customer success manager at Uber. And I reached out somebody to ask, hey, would you be willing to have a conversation with me so I can learn more about the role, get a better understanding of what it includes and whether or not I'd be a great fit. And I reached out to a few people at Uber. She was the only person who responded to me. We got on a call, had a conversation, gave me a pretty good understanding of what she did day to day, and ultimately was confident in my ability to do the job, recommended me to her manager, and that's what started my process, which ultimately led to me getting enrolled there. So growing the network, even as I mentioned, I was at an event today and yesterday, trying to grow my network, meet more people. You never know who's going to be able to connect you in an opportunity, or even just up level you, help you understand how to interview and how to approach the job search or whatever else you're looking to do. And when you ask that question about your first interview, one, it can be with a hiring manager. It can be with a hiring manager. It can be with a recruiter. It can be with someone different. Kind of really depends on how you enter the process. The Uber example I gave, I actually went right into a conversation with the hiring manager because I was being recommended by the hiring manager's direct report. I've had a lot of interviews where it was just a recruiter. I've had some where I jumped straight into a full day interview. So it can look very different depending on the company, how you ended up in the process, whether they reached out to you or you reached out to them. If that first conversation is one where it's more exploratory, you're always going to get the question, tell me about yourself. And I think that's what set the tone for the rest of the interview. If you know why you applied to that job specifically, why you applied to the company, and you can communicate in that answer how you and everything you've done so far makes you a good fit for that role, it makes the rest of the conversations you're going to get that much easier. Now, I always recommend you don't want to keep your answer too long. I mean, because you want to give the other person a chance to ask more pointed questions. You don't answer that as a 20-minute answer because there's going to be more questions that come, but you definitely want to have rehearsed and understand, okay, this is a role in customer success or a role as an associate or a role as a manager, whatever the role may be. This is what they said they were looking for in the job posting, and this is what I have on my resume. Let me draw a direct parallel. So going into your spiel or your elevator pitch, whatever you may call it, in a way that gives a brief summary of what you've done, in a way that makes it clear that you are a good fit based on what you've seen. Now, some recruiters are going to ask you questions that are just for their purposes. They may ask you things like, well, do you have this many years of experience, or have you dealt with customers of this size before? And there's some things that you may not be able to prepare for because you don't know ahead of time. But the number one question I think everyone should be prepared for is to tell me about yourself, because that should be something you've already crafted before you even get on the call or get into the interview with that hiring manager, recruiter, or whoever it is you're having that first conversation with.
So important what you just mentioned, Tolu. Folks, I've interviewed probably a dozen people in the last couple of months, and I can tell you 1 out of 10, 10% max, right? And you know what? Probably would be lower if I interviewed more people, know how to answer that question correctly. It sounds simple. Tell me about yourself, right? I mean, it's, what can they expect? But what most people do that's totally wrong is they'll go on literally a 10 to 15 minute speech outlining every single little thing that they've done throughout their career. Well, guess what? When you meet somebody at a party, right? Maybe a networking event is a better comparison, but when you meet somebody at a party and they talk your ear off for 10 minutes, do you really want to talk to them much more? No, you're going to like talking to someone that's curious about you. Maybe they say, hey, yeah, I do this for a living and I'm from Boston or whatever it is. And then you have something in common and they ask you something about you and it's more of a dialogue, right? So nobody wants to sit there and listen to you talk about every single little thing that you've done. But what you should do instead, to Tolu's point, is have a really concise story about yourself. Now, what does that mean? Well, you have to practice it, right? Again, it's okay to do it in front of a mirror, record yourself or whatever it is, but 2 to 3 minutes, select only what is relevant for the role that you are applying for. So let's say you've done a lot of operational work and maybe 10 to 20% of your experience is customer facing. Well, 80% of your story should be about the customer facing experience, and then 20% can be about your operational work, right? Because that's still relevant, but you want it to be the most closely relevant to what role you're trying to get, and more specifically to what you think the person that you're talking to is going to be interested in hearing. So make sure you practice that story over and over and over again until it becomes second nature. I think that's super critical.
Yeah, Vadim, let me add this, is feel encouraged. I strongly encourage you, if you have the opportunity to ask questions, to simply ask, what would the ideal candidate look like for this role? Now, you may think, I've seen what they've posted online and they must be looking for someone with 20 years of experience and this and that. And in some cases, hiring managers don't actually have the time to get as detailed or to write up what they would ideally like, because it's a process to get these postings out. Sometimes they want to get it out right away. Sometimes it's someone else, like it's a recruiting person versus the hiring manager putting the information. So it's always helpful if you have the opportunity to simply ask that question. What would an ideal candidate look like? What would make you want to move forward with me versus somebody else? What do you think is essential for someone coming into this role to have? Because sometimes they may just not ask it in a very obvious way. And if they did, you'd actually be able to provide a solid answer. So whenever you get to the point of the interview, in that first interview where you can ask a question, do ask the question. And one of those questions can simply be, what would make me an ideal candidate?
I think that's a great question for many reasons. It shows not only that you are proactive, but you are someone that has a certain expectation for yourself of excellence. Another great question is, what would make someone really successful in this role? What would make someone like me successful in the first 6 months in this role? Well, it shows that you're goal oriented, and that's what every company wants. So that's a really great point, Tolu. It should be a dialogue, to Vadim's point, and to your point, a conversation throughout the interview where you don't talk for too long and you ask questions throughout. Given what you said, given that both of you talked about having a good story, something relevant to talk about that can convince someone that you're going to be someone they'll be comfortable putting in front of customers. If there's someone sitting at the event today, Tolu, and maybe they don't have like the exact experience, they know that there's something relevant, they've done some customer facing work, but they don't have the exact experience, they're not really confident yet about standing out in an interview, what would you recommend somebody spend the next 4 to 6 months doing? They can't really land a full-time role as a customer success person right now. What would you recommend they spend the next 4 to 6 months doing to be more attractive to that recruiter, to be more confident once they get into a conversation with a hiring manager to share that story? Oh, you're just muted.
Oops, sorry about that. The first thing I'd recommend is growing your network. Just getting to meet more people that are in the roles that are of interest to you. So wherever you see yourself in the next maybe 4 months, 6 months, whatever the time frame is, try to meet more people that are actually in that role, people that are hiring for that role, people that are connected to that role or that industry in some way, shape, or form, and then have conversations with them. I think as Vadim was saying earlier, you want to have conversations to understand, what are they looking for? How can you improve yourself to actually be a better fit for that role, for that industry, for that opportunity? Maybe that looks like taking a certain course. Maybe that looks like making sure you have a certain experience in your resume. Maybe that looks like taking on a side project in which you're learning certain coding language, whatever it may be. Being able to speak to people that are connected to the roles you're looking for, I'd say, is number one. Number two is just grow your skill set as much as possible. You want to make sure that maybe today you don't know what POV is or a POC or objection handling, but you can definitely learn that by different means. And people have different means of absorbing information, but make sure that between now and 6 months from now, you're more knowledgeable. You have a lot more terminologies of what's happening in the industry. If you go into an interview, you can speak more with the terminologies that you didn't have 6 months prior. I'll say 3 is just get in practice. So be able to actually get in front of people and have practice interviews. Even if you're not ready today and you go in and answer some questions, it'll be easier to tell where your delta is. what questions you struggle with, or what kind of experience you can't speak about, or where the delta is and where you are today and where you want to be. So I'd say first is growing that network and leveraging it to understand how you can improve. Two is cultivating more the industry terminology, making sure that you're actually absorbing more information. And then three, just practicing the process, trying to do practice interviews. Maybe you're applying to jobs that are more junior than what you're actually going to go for, so you can get the practice in, or applying to jobs at companies where you're open to being rejected because you just want to get the experience of going through the process, because it's helpful to make sure that the interview that you're most excited about isn't the first interview that you have.
That's totally right. And folks, for those of you that are thinking, well, how can I start this process of self-study? There's obviously a million of an unlimited free resources online where you can read up about customer success and sales and persuasion and things like that. But I would say what Tolu just said, which is connecting with people, is going to be the number one thing, right? You can do self-study courses online, free courses, Google has certificates, but connecting with people is really critical. This is why people that join our programs, we over-index so much of the time on obviously learning the terminology, but also learning how to sell yourself and connecting with people on a weekly basis. And the students that we have going through our programs that stick to connecting with people every single week, and I don't mean a couple people 1 week and then not again for another month, but every single week, they will land interviews, then they'll meet with career coaches in our program, and then they will practice that interview to make sure they get it right and finally get an opportunity as quickly as possible. And that transformation can happen in months. It doesn't have to take years, right? And if you've been doing self-paced certificates and it's taking you a long time, it probably means that you have not prioritized connecting with people. So if you take away one thing from this meeting, is meeting people and getting on calls with folks in the industries that you're targeting is going to be super, super critical for what you need to do.
So we're coming up on time here, but we do want to give a few minutes for people to ask direct questions that they may have. So feel free to type in your question in the chat. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask Tolu or us a question directly, feel free to do so as well, or raise your hand and we'll call on you to unmute yourself, but in the chat works as well. And while you think of your questions here, and we'll just give a few minutes here for folks to think about their questions. One more question I have for you, Tolu. Obviously, most of us sitting here in the room, we're seeing things in the news about big tech companies having what seemed like crazy mass layoffs. Now, you and I both know that that's partly because they overhired, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of people during the pandemic. And so there's a correction right now. So actually net, there's more people working for these companies now than there were a couple of years ago. But we also know that as competitive as some of these roles might be at companies like Google and Uber right now, or Meta for that matter, there are tons of customer success roles or sales-oriented customer-facing roles at companies that are a little bit smaller, right? Or companies that are up and coming, or growth companies. There are thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of technology companies in the US alone with job openings in roles like customer success. I'm curious if you have any thought or advice on how someone might target the right opportunity, right? So out of all the universe of companies that exist out there, which ones should I be applying to if I want to get my foot in the door? Let's say if in 3 years I want to go get a job at Google, what are the type of companies that I should be targeting, and how can my background play into what I should target for now, where people are hiring?
Yeah, my approach for people I generally chat with is look at two things. One, look at products or services that you genuinely just like. You think maybe they work, they do a good job, you're excited to use it. Some people that could be something like Slack, I mentioned earlier. Some people that could be something just like Gmail. It could be something that nobody else really uses, very niche. Like I bought Google Glasses the other day that pretty much no one uses it, but I was excited about it. So I'd say look around. They could be small, big things that you've come across. It could be in your personal life. It could be at work that you've said, oh, this is actually cool, because as I mentioned earlier, part of your job is going to be to stay up to date, to kind of learn, to kind of try to absorb information. So if it can be something that you're excited about, that you actually generally just think it's done well, it has a cool factor to it, or you can see how it's going to be relevant in the future, it's helpful to start your search there, because it becomes a bit more about just, okay, how do I do this job? Not also just trying to force yourself to love or get to understand this product. Then two is look at your background and think about how that background may be able to help you more easily transition. So I use retail as an example. There are companies that are service providers for retail companies, or if you were doing manufacturing or you were in something else, if you're looking at a tech company that serves customers in that space, then you may have a bit more of the terminology already, or you may understand some of the things that are at play. For example, at Uber Eats, I mentioned that's where I started my customer success. We had a decent number of people who had worked in the restaurant industry, I mean, servers, waiters, coming to Uber Eats because they understood what it meant to have an experience where someone had to come and pick up food while you were actually trying to manage people that were in store. They know what POS system is because they've had to deal with it. So there are certain terminologies that, even though that may not be the tech, you have exposed to it based on your role. So you have a leg up versus someone who has never worked in a restaurant, doesn't know what a back office look like or what procedures are in that restaurant. So I'd say either one, start by thinking about, okay, what things do I like? What products, what services have I seen that's piqued my interest? Or just two, based on my experiences so far, based on the industry I've been exposed to, what adjacent tech industry or tech companies, I should say, can I look at that serve that industry, that serve people that are coming from my background, or that serve companies that I've worked with in the past? Because that's going to give you a bit of a leg up in understanding what challenges the tech company or your future company may be trying to solve.
Thank you, Tolu. We're going to go to some questions in the chat. And folks, as promised in the emails that you saw from us, as a benefit from being here live with us, I'm going to drop some our LinkedIn's in the chat. So Tolu, I'm going to drop yours as well. I know that you don't mind.
Go for it.
Tolu has 10,000 connections on LinkedIn. Don't let that overwhelm you. Tolu's really, part of the reason why he's been teaching with School16 for, I don't know, it's been about a year maybe already. And that's because Tolu loves working with people like you guys, right? That are transitioning careers, that have very, very different backgrounds, because he's been through the same exact thing. So we invite you guys to network with us just by adding us on LinkedIn at the very least, and by being here, we're dropping the links directly into the chat. So go ahead and click on those links now before they go away at the end of the session, so that you can add us on LinkedIn, add or follow us, whatever makes sense for you. So one person asked, can you share your best LinkedIn networking tips? So I'll cover that. That one's a long answer. So what I'll say there is, if you are on our email list, you were probably received a recording of the session that we did with Laura Holt, and there we even share templates of outreach messages you can send on LinkedIn when connecting with people cold. So check your email or go to school16.co. In the navigation, there's a free classes section, and click on that and you'll see the recording of that last session. You can watch the recording. We spent an hour talking about this topic, and it is a behemoth of a topic. Obviously, if you want to add something to that question, Tolu, go ahead in terms of LinkedIn networking. But
yeah, let me add a quick nugget here that I discovered maybe 7 months, not too long ago, is people are generally a lot more open to connecting with people at physical events. And I'm sure a lot of people know that. But that means that even if you can't make the event, there's a time period in which people who do go to the event are a lot more prone to being able to accept connections. So let me use an example. I went to a conference today and yesterday. Right now, I know that there were 160 people at the conference. There's no way I'm gonna remember everyone I met. If I get a connection request today, I'm a lot more likely to accept it than if I get one 2 days or 3 days from now, because nothing has happened. So if you're thinking about connecting with people, if you see that, oh, this person is gonna go to an event on this day, actually try to send the connection request on that day, because that's when they're just more open to connecting with people, because they've just met a bunch of people. They're more willing to say, oh, maybe this one I've run into or not, I'm not sure. Let me connect with this person. Then I would say also follow what Sergey and Vadim just mentioned. There are a lot of templates that are more effective, but just in terms of timing, if you can time it to coincide with a certain event they've attended, your likelihood of success goes way up.
So true. So true. Quick 10-second story. Serg and I write for Forbes and Harvard Business Review, and it was the same exact way that we got to write for HBR. We went to a conference. We met the chief editor of Harvard Business Review. We literally exchanged cards with her. It was a 10-second interaction, but I followed up with an email that night, and that started a 3-month conversation that ended up getting us published in that magazine. So that's oftentimes what it takes, is that follow through. Don't feel like you're bothering people. You have to put yourself out there and you have to do the work. Such a good advice, totally right. There was another question from somebody named Vadim. Do you have a couple of powerful keywords you would add in when you're answering the tell me about yourself part of the interview process, specifically for customer success interviews? Any keywords that maybe come to mind, Tolu?
Remember to mute myself this time. So I don't want to give anything too specific, because I think how well it resonates will depend on how well those words truly represent your own experience. So I spoke earlier, for example, saying you could say I'm a very fast learner, but if you can't give an example of you being a fast learner, or that doesn't show from your resume or whatever else you're providing, then there's going to be a disconnect. So I'd say first, think about what attributes of my experience, of my education or my work experience can I showcase in a very, very, very strong light, and then use that to generate the keywords. So can list a bunch, but if you can't back it with real experience, then it can't be something where someone says, wow, this is overwhelming experience. That you can say you're customer centric, you're someone who is numbers obsessed, you're someone who's very technically savvy, you're someone who's a quick learner. It's a bunch of things you can use that will resonate in customer success, but we want to make sure that it resonates with your experience, and it's not just something you're saying because you think it's going to get you favorable considerations compared to other applicants.
100% agree with that, Tolu. Really appreciate your insights and the candor of not only sharing your own story, but the reality of standing up in these interviews. I think everybody on this call is aware of how competitive some of these roles can get, which means you have to come prepared, right? You have to come prepared, not only sharing your story, but also understanding how you actually directly tie in the experience in a way that's relevant to somebody else. So I think that's really, really helpful. If you're joined us in this event and a lot of this information is completely brand new, you're really just starting to explore what customer success is, what you want to do in your career, we encourage you to continue coming to these free events. And we have tons, over like 55 or 60 video recordings of previous seminars we've done with various tech roles on our website under the free classes section. So encourage you to continue to coming to these events and getting these emails. If you're a little bit further down the line and you've done a lot of these things, maybe you've done some certifications, but you still haven't seen results, encourage you to apply to our program, which is starting in just about a week and a half, that Tolu is going to be teaching. If you're already enrolled, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. We'll have a meet and greet on that Friday that you'll get on a calendar invite for. But if not, I encourage you to apply, whether you're considering a program like this that is live, where you're doing a lot of networking, you get a lot of mentorship and work on projects. Encourage you to apply, even just to get some advice, or if School16 is not a fit for you, we'll point you to another direction, right? We know all of the companies in the space that offer certifications, that have live classes. And if we think that this isn't the right school for you, we'll always gladly point you to other schools where we know the CEOs and the leaders who will give you a great education and give you outcomes, most importantly, because the certificate is not enough, right? That's not going to get you the job. It's really the stuff that we talked about here today. So there's a deadline coming up. Encourage you to apply. But even if you can drop that link, the application link in the chat, I think you already did. There it is. Also, again, if you just want to kind of follow along with what we're doing here at School16, you're not really ready to talk to anybody on our team, that's great too. You can follow us at School16 Co on Instagram, where we post reels and stories from real people, our own stories about how we've broken into these types of roles regularly on these channels, and also on our LinkedIn page at School16. We're a school on that site. So thank you so much, folks, for joining us here today. Really appreciate, Tolu, again, your story, your time, and your contribution to the School16 community. And excited to hear from everyone as you join these sessions moving forward. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tolu.
Thank you.
All right. See you soon, folks.
See you all
Everybody.
soon.